Welcome. Tonight, we begin softly, not with battle cries or trumpets, but with a whisper, a woman's whisper, perhaps, quiet, dignified, and resolute, echoing through stone corridors lined with cold air and heavy secrets. You are invited to enter a world where history breathes more slowly, where power sits not on a throne, but beneath veils, beneath whispers, and behind doors that do not open easily. This is not a story of monsters or legends. This is the story of a woman, a Queen Mary Stuart, better known to the world as Mary, Queen of Scots, was born into royalty and into danger. Her life, long before it ever reached the scaffold, had always hovered near the blade dot in her final days. She was not merely executed, she was displayed, misjudged, silenced, but even in silence, she endured. This story is not told in shouts, but in fabric, in ink, in the delicate tremor of a candle flame. Let yourself settle now. Let your breathing soften. As we begin the long and graceful descent into one of the most tragic and strangely beautiful ends in royal history. We begin, as always, at the beginning. Imagine, for a moment, that your first breath is not drawn in peace, but in expectation. You are born into a cradle of silk, but also of steel. Every glance that greets you is lined with calculation, every lullaby, a political negotiation. This was the world that greeted Mary Stuart when she was born in December of 1542, in the chill of Linlithgow Palace, nestled beside a loch that reflected the low, grey skies of Scotland. Her father, King James V of Scotland, had just suffered a crushing military defeat, and within days of Mary's birth, he died. Legend claims that upon hearing the news of his newborn daughter, he uttered only one phrase. It came with alas, and it will go with alas, and with that, the crown of Scotland fell upon the head of a 6-day-old girl, the weight of a kingdom, the silence of a cradle. From the very beginning, Mary's life was not her own. She was born with claims not only to Scotland, but, through her grandmother Margaret Tudor, to England as well. This bloodline, thin and winding, would one day put her at odds with Elizabeth I, the English queen who ruled with cold resolve from across the border. But Mary, in her earliest years, knew none of this. She knew only the rhythm of royal life in exile. At the age of 5, she was sent away, across the sea, to be raised in the glittering court of France, a realm of candlelight banquets, courtly poets, and embroidered diplomacy. In France, Mary blossomed. She spoke French fluently. She learned Latin, Greek, Italian, and Spanish. She was taught music and dance, falconry and diplomacy, and above all, she was trained in grace. A queen not only by blood, but by posture. By 16, she had become queen consort of France, married to the frail and boyish Francis II. For a brief moment, it seemed that fate had smiled on her, but like so many things in Mary's life, the brightness would not last. Just a year later, Francis died, his body consumed by illness, and Mary, still a teenager, found herself widowed and unwanted. France, that once glittering sanctuary, cooled toward her. And so, Mary returned to Scotland, returned not as a child, but as a woman with power, and what she found waiting for her was not welcome, but wariness. Scotland was a land of turbulence, where noble families feuded, religious unrest simmered, and loyalties bent like reeds in the wind. Mary, though Catholic, ruled a country that was turning sharply toward Protestantism. Though graceful and intelligent, she faced a court that viewed her as foreign, and though crowned by divine right, she entered a realm that had never truly trusted queens, especially not those who smiled too easily or came dressed in French silk. But Mary, she tried. She held court with poise. She listened. She compromised. She ruled with a kind of tempered warmth, believing, perhaps naively, that politics could be softened through courtesy. For a time, it worked. She was admired, painted, praised. Her beauty became legend. Auburn hair, creamy skin, tall and slender with a composure that never quite cracked. Even her enemies wrote of her elegance. But below the surface, always, the blades waited. Because in royal life, admiration is often the first stage of betrayal. Mary may have been born a queen, but she was also born into a chessboard, one where each move carried quiet danger, and soon the next move would come, and it would come in the form of love, or something like it, a man, a marriage, a murder, and with it, the slow unraveling of everything Mary had tried to preserve. But that is where we will go next. Let us return now to the gentle echo of footsteps across a cold stone floor. The early days of Mary's return to Scotland had been cautious, but hopeful. A young queen walking through long, darkened halls, silk trailing behind her. The air scented faintly with lavender, peat smoke, and the ink of diplomatic letters drying by candlelight. But where beauty walks, so often danger follows. In 1565, Mary made a decision, one rooted not only in strategy, but perhaps in the rhythms of the heart. She chose to marry Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. Tall, handsome, charming, and most dangerously of all, royal. Darnley was Mary's cousin through that same tangled Tudor bloodline, and his lineage meant something more than romance. It meant claim. To the Scottish crown, to the English crown. To everything Mary already had, and everything Elizabeth feared. Their union, to some, looked perfect. To tall, golden royals joined beneath tapestries and organ music. But beneath the surface, the water had already begun to rot. Darnley was beautiful, but brittle. Within months, the court began to whisper about his drunkenness, his vanity, his pettiness. He resented the power Mary still held, even as his name was stitched into royal documents. He wanted more. He wanted the crown matrimonial, the right to rule with her. Mary, perhaps seeing his instability, hesitated. And from that hesitation, the bitterness grew. Then came Rizzio. David Rizzio, an Italian musician and court secretary, had risen quickly in Mary's household. He was clever, quick-tongued, skilled in flattery, and perhaps the familiar rumors flew that he was more than an advisor, that he knew the Queen's private chambers too well, that the child Mary carried might not be Darnley's at all. But his. There is no proof, no certainty, only silence, and then blood. On a quiet March evening in 1566, while Mary sat at supper, heavily pregnant, tired, Darnley and a group of armed men stormed into her chambers. Before her eyes, before the eyes of her ladies-in-waiting, they dragged Rizzio from her side and stabbed him again and again and again. Some say more than 50 times, the floorboard soaked in it. Mary was held in place, forced to witness not only the killing of her confidant, but the unraveling of her marriage. But queens, especially young ones born among blades, learn to compose themselves, even in the presence of death. Mary survived the night, and within months, she gave birth to a son, James, who would one day rule both Scotland and England. For a moment, Mary had an heir, but she had lost something deeper. Trust, balance, control. And soon, even more. In February of 1567, less than a year after her son was born, Darnley himself was found dead. His house had exploded in the middle of the night. His body was discovered in the orchard nearby, but not burned, not crushed. No. He had been strangled, escaped the fire, only to be killed outside. The message, if there was one, had not been subtle. Someone had wanted him gone, not by accident, not by misfortune, but by design. And now, the whispers turned again. To Mary. Had she known? Had she planned it? Had she stood silently behind the curtain as others struck the blow, or had she simply allowed it to happen? The people of Scotland wanted answers. The nobles wanted a shift in power, and Mary, in her grief, stepped further into the shadows of suspicion, because just weeks after Darnley's death, Mary did something no one expected. She married again, and this time to the man most suspected of Darnley's murder, James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell. It's hard to know why. Some say she loved him. Others say she was coerced, kidnapped, violated, and forced into marriage by a man who knew how to exploit vulnerability. What is clear is that the union was a catastrophe. The nobility turned against her, her people wept, her enemies rejoiced, and her reign began to fold in upon itself, quietly, like a tapestry pulled at one fraying edge. Within months, Mary was imprisoned, her crown taken, her child, her only son, removed from her care, and Bothwell fled. Across the sea, into exile, into madness. She would never see him again. So now, picture her, not the queen draped in velvet, but the woman alone, in a quiet chamber, the light through the window thin, the air cold, The echoes still loud, the crowd still hers, in theory, but not in practice, and the blood on the floor still drying. Still remembered. Still staining. Asterisk. What began in marriage had ended in isolation, but not yet in silence, because for Mary, the silence was still to come, and it would last 19 years. We'll go there, gently, in the next part. Imagine time not as a river, rushing and wild, but as a slow drip, a drop of water, falling from the edge of a stone ceiling, one, and then another, and another, each drop echoing softly through a quiet room. This is the sound of captivity. Mary, Queen of Scots, was not thrown into a dungeon. She was not shackled or buried underground. No, her prison was softer, and in many ways, much crueler. After her forced abdication in 1567 and the collapse of her final marriage, Mary sought asylum. She fled across the border into England, into the realm of her cousin, Elizabeth I, a queen, seeking sanctuary from a queen, a woman asking for mercy from another woman who knew the price of power. But Elizabeth was not inclined to give it. Too many. Mary was not a guest. She was a threat. She carried Catholic hope in her veins. She had a claim, however distant, to Elizabeth's throne, as she was beloved by many in Europe who saw Protestant England as a realm that needed correcting. To keep Mary free was to live with a match waiting for a spark. So Elizabeth, cautious and cold, chose a different path. She detained her, not publicly, not brutally, but privately, thoroughly. And the years began to pass. First, there was Carlisle Castle, damp and gray beside the Scottish border, then Bolton, then Tutbury, Sheffield, Charlie, and finally Fotheringhay. Each placed a new room, a new warden, a new set of rules, but always the same sky. Her chambers were comfortable by the standards of the age. Tapestries lined the walls. She had servants, books, and letters, a small garden, a little chapel, but no door open without permission, no letter left without inspection, and no conversation ever truly ended in privacy. It was a cage with cushions. Mary's health began to wane. She suffered from rheumatism, joints aching with each season. She limped when she walked. Her once luminous skin grew pale. Her auburn hair turned silver too soon, and yet she endured. She wrote constantly, in French, in English, in ciphered codes. She embroidered small, intricate tapestries that carried symbols of her lineage, her faith, her memory. They were quiet acts of rebellion, stitch by stitch, thought by thought. She kept herself from vanishing. But 19 years is a long time, even for a queen, even for a soul forged in hardship. Time does not only move forward, it circles, it seeps, it shapes. And in that slow shaping, Mary's world began to dissolve, not suddenly, but steadily, as candlelight disappears when the wax grows thin. Imagine the rhythm of her days, waking with the sound of footsteps in the corridor, the same knock, the same faces, the same meals with the same taste, served on the same tray, the same garden, the same stone, the same ache in her knees, the same unanswered letters, the weight of sameness pressing down, gently, and then not so gently. She still dreamed. She still believed that Elizabeth would see her, not as a rival, but as a cousin, a fellow monarch, a fellow woman. But the letter she sent meant silence, or, worse, political reply. She had become an inconvenience, a breathing danger, a memory that refused to die. And so she waited. For news, for visitors, for meaning. She waited as the world turned without her. Nations shifted, wars rose and fell. Children she once held grew into strangers, and she embroidered and prayed and tried not to forget the sound of her own voice. But in the final years, her mind began to wander more than her feet ever could. She saw conspiracies, some real, many imagined. She dreamed of rescue. She feared poison. She feared betrayal. And still, she signed her letters with hope, your most faithful sister and subject, even as her voice grew quieter. And then, one day, after 19 long years, a letter arrived, not one she had written, but one written about her, signed by Elizabeth, not to free her, but to end her. But before we go there, before we walk with her toward the scaffold, let us pause here with the image of a woman seated quietly at her window, needle in hand, eyes distant, the hem of her gown resting on cold stone. The world outside, always out of reach, and within, a clock that had ticked for 19 years, finally began to stop. Let us begin this part, slowly as though entering a long hallway, cold, stone, lined with silence, lit by nothing but memory. At the end of this corridor sits a courtroom, but this is no court of truth. It is a formality, a decision already made. The room is just the performance. The year was 1586. Mary had now been in captivity for nearly 2 decades. Her body had softened. Her joints ached. Her world had narrowed into a few rooms and a few trusted hands. But her name still traveled. Her name still whispered through Catholic Europe like a prayer or a threat. And across England, plots stirred. Real ones, imagined ones, some inspired by her, others merely invoking her image. The most famous of these was the Babington plot, a failed Catholic conspiracy to assassinate Queen Elizabeth and place Mary on the English throne. Did Mary know about it? Did she approve? Or was her name, once again, simply a mask worn by others? It hardly mattered, because her letters were intercepted, encrypted messages hidden in beer barrels, decoded and used against her. They were suggestive, cautious, but not entirely innocent, and they were enough. Elizabeth's ministers, especially Francis Walsingham, her spy master, saw what they had been waiting for, a chance not to silence Mary, but to justify silencing her. The gears of law began to turn, not slowly, but purposefully. They summoned her to stand trial. The location was Fotheringhay Castle, gray and withdrawn, surrounded by damp fields and bare trees, a place far from courts and crowds, a place suited for endings. Mary arrived not as a queen, but as a prisoner. She was not allowed legal counsel. She could not review the evidence. She could not call witnesses in her defense. The judges, 40, noblemen loyal to Elizabeth, had already received their instructions. But Mary, even after years in captivity, stood with dignity. She did not beg. She did not scream. She did not plead for mercy. She reminded them, calmly, that she was a sovereign queen, not an English subject, not bound by English law, and certainly not beholden to a court designed to confirm what had already been decided. Her voice, hoarse with age, steady with faith, echoed in the quiet hall. I am the Queen of Scots. I am the daughter of a king. I am no subject of yours. But her words were never going to matter. By the end of October 1586, the verdict was declared guilty of treason, a sentence of death. And Mary, now 53, returned to her chambers. Not in rage, not in fear, but in a silence so profound it felt like snowfall. Elizabeth hesitated. She did not want to sign the death warrant, or rather, she did not want the blame. For months, she delayed, she questioned, she consulted, she spoke of conscience, of justice, of divine right. But in the quiet of her own court, she understood, as long as Mary lived, Elizabeth would never truly sleep. And so, on February 1st, 1587, she signed the warrant, softly, with a pen of gold, and a hand that trembled, just a little. The order was clear. Mary, Queen of Scots, was to be executed within the week. The performance was nearly over, but the final act would leave the audience breathless. Before we go there, before the curtain falls, before the blade, let us linger one more moment in this hush. Picture her, that night, her fire burning low. Her rosary in hand, her writing table cleared, and a letter, her final one, being composed under candlelight, written not to Elizabeth, but to her cousin, Henry III, the King of France. I die a Catholic, a queen, and a stranger in your land. And in those final strokes of ink she gave, her story is ending, but the world was not yet ready for what that ending would look like. Imagine the sky before dawn, still, colorless, neither night nor day. Now imagine a castle, not glowing with candlelight, but sleeping beneath frost. Fotheringhay, a name now hollow with time, but once heavy with purpose. It was February 8th, 1587. A Wednesday. Cold. Still. Mary had risen early. She dressed herself, not in black, but in velvet crimson, the color of martyrdom, the color of blood, and, in some strange way, the color of authority. Her gown was layered, full, carefully chosen, a silk veil, a crucifix at her chest, her rosary wrapped gently between her fingers. Everything deliberate. Asterisk, she stepped calmly into the great hall, not dragged, not escorted with force, but walking with a grace that defied the setting. A wooden scaffold had been built, covered with black cloth, a small cushion at its center, and beside it, a block, and beside that, the executioner. Asterisk, there were around 300 people in the room, witnesses, officials, guards. They watched. A few met her eyes. Mary climbed the steps, unassisted. She turned slowly to the crowd and spoke, not to protest, but to forgive. She asked them to pray for her, and then, with solemn breath, she prayed aloud herself, not in English, but in Latin. Immanis tuas, Domini, commendo spiritum meum, into your hands, O Lord. I commend my spirit. Then came the final ritual. She removed her outer garments, revealing a deep red underdress, unmistakable, a final message of faith, of resolve. She was offered help with a blindfold. She refused. She tied it herself, and then she knelt and laid her head upon the block. The room was utterly still, so still you might have heard the creak of the wood, the breath of a witness, held along, the distant wind pressing against stone walls. And then, the sword rose, not a clean edge, not the smooth, single slice of legend, but a broad English axe. The first strike fell hard, but not true. It struck the back of her head, a deep blow, but not a finishing one. A low gasp passed through the room. The executioner adjusted. The second strike came down, and this time the head was nearly severed, but not quite. It was the third that completed the task. And then it was done. The executioner lifted her head and called out, "God save the Queen." But in that moment, something unexpected happened. As he held the head aloft, Mary's wig came loose, and what remained in his hand was a mass of auburn hair, detached from a head, that fell suddenly to the floor with a dull, tragic sound. Witnesses later recalled the image of her body still clothed in red, and beside it, a small dog, her terrier, that had hidden in the folds of her gown. It refused to leave. It licked the blood that had soaked into the boards, and no one had the heart to take it away. There was no music, no prayer from the crown, no bells, only the slow disassembling of the room, the muffled footsteps, the scaffold being taken apart, the cloth folded, the body wrapped. In silence. Elizabeth, when informed of the execution, claimed she had not meant for it to happen so soon. She wept, or so the letters say. She punished the courier, dismissed the secretary, but Mary was already gone, and nothing Elizabeth could say would lift her back from that wooden block. The stain had already dried. Let us leave this part quietly. Let us not replay the sounds. Let us not linger on the steel. Let us just sit, for a while, with the quiet after. The third blow, with the color red, with the flicker of a candle, with the small dog curled beside a dress no longer rising and falling with breath. Let us remember a queen, not in the violence of her end, but in the steadiness with which she accepted it. The body was still, wrapped now, not in velvet, but in linen, a shroud, soft, plain, unadorned. The blood, once warm, had cooled. The hair, once admired, was scattered in red strands on the scaffold. The crown, once imagined, never worn in England, what remained was quiet. They carried her gently. Not because they loved her, but because something sacred still clung to her, even in death. There was weight. Not physical, but historical. A sense that this body meant something more than what the room had witnessed. Her small dog followed behind. It had refused to eat, refused to be touched. Its white fur stained with blood, a silent witness to the final breaths of a woman it had curled beside for countless nights. There are no records of what became of the dog. No burial, no epitaph, but somehow its presence lingers. Mary's body was embalmed, entombed, but it would not stay in one place forever. Decades later, long after Elizabeth herself had died, Mary was moved. Her son, James I of England, the child Mary had not seen since infancy, ordered her remains relocated to Westminster Abbey. There, she was reburied beneath the grand tomb. In marble, in silence, just steps away from Elizabeth herself, mother and executioner, laid to rest within the same secret stone. History has a curious sense of irony. Asterisk asterisk, but we return now to those immediate days. To Elizabeth. To the silence that followed the execution. Not just in the court, but in her mind. Elizabeth did not rejoice. There were no public celebrations, no open proclamations of triumph. Instead, there was retreat, regret, perhaps, or political calculation, or something harder to name. Asterisk asterisk letters were written, explaining, justifying, deflecting. The secretary who carried out the warrant was dismissed, blamed. Elizabeth wept, it was said, or maybe she did in single quotes. No one ever knew quite what she felt, only what she chose to show. And what she chose was absence. Asterisk asterisk, in a strange way. Mary had won something in death that she could never claim in life. She became a symbol. To Catholics, a martyr. To her enemies, a ghost. To the world, a story, a woman who died with grace, whose blood on English would refuse to be scrubbed clean by time. Asterisk asterisk, and so we are left with a red dress, a silent dog, a sword that missed once, then twice, before it finally took what it came. For the cousin, who could not say the name, and a tomb, neither in France nor Scotland, but England, the land she entered as a fugitive, and never left. Asterisk asterisk, let this part settle like dusk, not sudden, but gradual, a fading of light on stone, a chill along the windowsill. A story that folds in on itself as the final page nears. Because there is still one more moment to share. Not a moment of action, but of legacy. Of what it means to live on. In the silence that follows power, we'll go there next softly. The body was still, wrapped now, not in velvet, but in linen, a shroud, soft, plain, unadorned. The blood, once warm, had cooled. The hair, once admired, was scattered in red strands on the scaffold. The crown, once imagined, never worn in England, what remained was quiet. Asterisk asterisk, they carried her gently. Not because they loved her, but because something sacred still clung to her, even in death. There was weight. Not physical, but historical. A sense that this body meant something more than what the room had witnessed. Asterisk asterisk, her small dog followed behind. It had refused to eat, refused to be touched. Its white fur stained with blood, a silent witness to the final breaths of a woman it had curled beside for countless nights. There are no records of what became of the dog. No burial, no epitaph, but somehow its presence lingers. Asterisk asterisk, Mary's body was embalmed, entombed, but it would not stay in one place forever. Decades later, long after Elizabeth herself had died, Mary was moved. Her son, James I of England, the child Mary had not seen since infancy, ordered her remains relocated to Westminster Abbey. There, she was reburied beneath the grand tomb. In marble, in silence, just steps away from Elizabeth herself, mother and executioner, laid to rest within the same secret stone. History has a curious sense of irony. Asterisk asterisk, but we return now to those immediate days. To Elizabeth. To the silence that followed the execution. Not just in the court, but in her mind. Elizabeth did not rejoice. There were no public celebrations, no open proclamations of triumph. Instead, there was retreat, regret, perhaps, or political calculation, or something harder to name. Asterisk asterisk letters were written, explaining, justifying, deflecting. The secretary who carried out the warrant was dismissed, blamed. Elizabeth wept, it was said, or maybe she did in single quotes. No one ever knew quite what she felt, only what she chose to show. And what she chose was absence. Asterisk asterisk, in a strange way. Mary had won something in death that she could never claim in life. She became a symbol. To Catholics, a martyr. To her enemies, a ghost. To the world, a story, a woman who died with grace, whose blood on English would refuse to be scrubbed clean by time. Asterisk asterisk, and so we are left with a red dress, a silent dog, a sword that missed once, then twice, before it finally took what it came. For the cousin, who could not say the name, and a tomb, neither in France nor Scotland, but England, the land she entered as a fugitive, and never left. Asterisk asterisk, let this part settle like dusk, not sudden, but gradual, a fading of light on stone, a chill along the windowsill. A story that folds in on itself as the final page nears. Because there is still one more moment to share. Not a moment of action, but of legacy. Of what it means to live on. In a silence that follows power, we'll go there next softly,